Okay, so it says it started. So this is ThouArtThat made it. So yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't answer. There was a comment asking when it starts, but it wouldn't let me add a comment yet, probably because it hadn't started or something like that. It was interesting because I got home a little while ago. I went to a concert for my stepson. Was having a performance, and band and choir and singing groups and stuff,
Hmm.
and it was really hard on me. And also, I was wondering, well, what am I going to do? Maybe I'd make a video because I'm also a little bit. I have this window open. Sorry.
Hmm.
It's like 30 seconds delayed, and I had the window open, so I started hearing an echo.
Hmm.
And I'm kind of, so I'm not going to explain something succinct here. I just had sort of angst that I don't normally have about the channel, and I was thinking of making a video that probably would have been a little bit just pissed off. And on the other hand, I decided to describe what had happened with that 5 hour thing, as
Hmm.
opposed to take it down, as opposed to shining it on. To me, I saw meaning in that coincidence of that it would all happen in that moment, because really, to me, it's not about the drinking. I don't have times when I don't have a memory of it. That's rare, but I definitely have times that I've probably drunk, similar amounts, and I've definitely been, you know, way too drunk on stickum, and then that isn't really the primary thing. There's an element of, do I really need to figure out how to handle that kind of possibility? But really, I think it was, and I haven't watched that conversation with Das Spook, but I know how I feel about talking to him, and I think I just went to a place in my mind that, yeah, I there's panic or difficult things to cope with, and I'm still struggling to cope with, some however you want to put it. And
Hmm.
then uh, which is not something I've really normally done with my channel, but over the years, I've had to be more honest, um, just because it is relevant. I mean, I had to be more personal to be honest. Like at one point I had to say, look, I got a philosophy degree. That's why I keep telling you about philosophical systems I don't believe in. And I'm trying to say, look, I don't have this classical epistemology. Well, how do I know what it? Well, okay, and so it becomes relevant. And but and then the other thing is just kind of weird, like it's a surprise, because I've been mentioning some of the problems when I had also decided people knew about my daughter. I decided I should just be honest, but I haven't gone into much detail. But I kind of mention things like, oh yeah, I've been felt suicidal. I've dealt with that the last year and a half, and I mean, I describe myself as having a big problem with it, but I just didn't dwell on it. Then I make 5 videos with the word spirituality,
Yeah.
and you and I have gone back and forth about the meaning of you know wanting to use the word materialist and this kind of stuff. We've had a lot of discussions on that, and so if anything, I'm doing it in a way that a lot of traditionally spiritual people, it's hard to put words on it. I'm a little bit I'm still probably a little bit in that space, but anyway, it's not flattering to how people think of spirituality. It's not people that are thinking that they figured out how to teleport from one place to another, or that why it's possible, and people that have any immediacy or reject the mortality, they don't dig this way of looking at spirituality. And yet there's just something also just that bugs me about, I don't think I've conveyed a channel where it's like I've come on and told people about how I'm dealing with my grief or my trauma. I
Hmm.
mentioned that I had a kind of head fuck childhood, but I don't go into the details. And so if I feel like if I was sitting out there watching me, I would acknowledge, oh, he's had these things, but he's not telling us about them. But people seem to think that they just grok it. They just understand, and they haven't even heard the part that I did reveal or say. or maybe they're just not connecting with it. And then the relationship to all this stuff, and why I think it was with Das Spook and with my current thing, is because talking to Hythloday, I just come up with this idea, looking for, well, what is this feeling? If there's a feeling of spirituality, and we're going to do an empirical study on it, then is it some other feeling? Is there another name for it? Is it a recipe, possibly? People had suggested it's the sense of awe, this feeling you get when in the face of something awesome, which I don't think is quite right, but again, it could be a recipe. And then with Hythloday, I sort of realized, well, it could be one-to-one with meaning, and we could call the spiritual experiences those times when it's less obvious what the meaning might be, but it might very well be the meaning of, look, I take a walk and I see footprints and I know there was an animal out there, or I see scat and I know, oh, there's a coyote here, and then my neighbor's like, I just saw a coyote yesterday, and so that means something. We don't take that spiritually in general parlance, but the feeling is sort of similar, and yet coincidences, which he brought up, the coincidence, how they seem meaningful. And so maybe it's just one-to-one with this sense of meaning, because in my case, and in going in nature looking for meaning, I do count that. Seeing the traces of the animals that are there that hide so well you hardly ever see them, but they're everywhere. Like in my forest, I could tell there's deers everywhere, and I have yet to see one in my forest. I've seen them around here. So so if we I'm starting to get the sense that we're rejecting a sense of meaning because of what's happened to us in spirituality, and it's kind of like realizing that love is that romantic attraction is genetically and biochemically generated, so you never want to fall in love. You don't want to find someone to love, and that's how healthy it doesn't seem to me to be rejecting meaning. And I think it might be related to this wholehearted rejection of even the word spiritual, even a very material, it's just biochemistry version. So anyway, that became a big mess for me. But I mean, the other thing is that I felt really good about it. I mean, I had no ramifications. I embrace leaving the video up and the embarrassment and the example as well, and that it's helpful to others. I mean, I've seen people share things like that, and I think there's a value to the honesty of it. But really, partly that's because it doesn't really bother me. So, I felt like, wow, I found meaning in something I've been struggling with. And so how is that a bad thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think you should need to apologize for for taking spirituality seriously, or for um, wanting to be philosophical on YouTube. Um, I think the reason I wanted to come talk to you tonight is because, after um, Nick posting a series of videos where, he was pretty insulting towards me, and then Gary posting, Gary's always doing that. I'm more used to Gary doing it. But after those responses to me, and you were involved in, we got kind of lumped together as the crazy spiritual drug takers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been trying to post a response for several weeks, and I haven't been able to find sort of the right perspective. It's not like I'm really angry or hurt. I don't really care that much, but I know in order to keep posting videos on YouTube that I need to respond to it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reaching out to you now, looking for a sort of a venue or a conversation partner, really, to like draw out exactly what it is that I think they're getting mixed up, and what's been confused here. Because I want to do philosophy on YouTube too, and I think over the years that's required me being kind of upfront about my personal life and deleting my channel at one point. This is like going back 5 or 6 years, and then coming back, and for people that post videos as a sort of, this is kind of a spiritual practice for me, using YouTube. I do think of it that way. I've described it as prayer in the past. Recording YouTube videos is in some way like you could just say in a sort of mundane sense, it's just thinking out loud, but um, thinking out loud or philosophizing is using speech, even if it's one's own speech, as a way of altering consciousness. Speech, language is a kind of a drug, and I think when, Nick says that philosophy is just word wanking, what he's expressing is his fear of the power of language to alter our consciousness. And if you start listening, uh, if you start reading, the history of philosophy, and you start to learn the various sorts of speech or word magic that these thinkers were employing, I mean, you start to recognize that the universe is far stranger than the scientific materialist would lead you to imagine, and you start to recognize the openness that language, especially philosophical language, grants you towards your experience, such that
Hmm.
you know you experience isn't something that's just given to us because we're speaking animals, because we want to talk to one another, because we engage in philosophical dialogue. um, we're able to alter our experience, to reshape it, to transform it, so that it's not just like, there's a mechanical nature out there that we observe. The only nature there's ever been is the one that ourselves have always already been. So all of the attempts, we might make to um, understand or know a nature that's objective to us and that we separate ourselves from as a subject, um, we could only ever know a nature that we as subjects had already been involved in. All of our knowledge, all of our speaking to one another in an attempt to understand the world alters the world. It changes the world. Um, if only for the simple reason that we change each other as we speak to one another. We're altering one another's perception. Um, so I don't know. I guess there are ways that you have of philosophically talking about spirituality, and there are ways that I try to talk about spirituality that aren't in that don't stand in contradiction to our scientific knowledge. That don't.
No, I think they're converging right now. I think there's been a
Yes.
convergence in this last uh, whatever. You were the first person on YouTube I noticed. It's like, oh, you can just talk philosophy here, because I've been political blogging for like 5 years and other kinds of conversation, including like antitrust and stuff. And really, it was a series of where can I talk philosophy, And in politics, I'm politically active, so I was great, and there were certain actual actions we could do, and when political blogging was kind of taking off, but also was sort of an excuse to talk philosophy, but it's in this political framing. And I was going to, and I'd been podcasting and doing that as an interview style, interviewing other bloggers and some other people from politics. And I saw a video of yours, as Red Light Rocket, and I'm like, wow, you
Mhm.
could just talk directly. There's people here that will just take directly as a philosophical subject. And so, and this is just a funny, on terms of my thread of thought, but see, I could be projecting it in there, but I think it is related. Well, it's funny I would even put it that way, because it's like I don't feel like any apology about talking about spirituality, and I have the whole time. I haven't made a big,
Mhm.
like, 5 videos in a row, so people are going to see it if they see one of a week's worth of videos. But where but where I think I'm hesitant is, see, I think that seeing too much meaning is dangerous, but I want to do it and have it not be dangerous. I want to be able to surf that. And but there's a meaning to that. So you um, gave me permission to talk philosophy directly online, and I didn't need permission. It's just that I would do it, and it's like nobody's getting it if you put it that way. And there's no, you're talking to yourself, and there's exceptions, and there were philosophy boards, but then I felt like, no, I wanted this in the street, everybody talking philosophy. I didn't necessarily want to go to some Usenet that was just philosophy professors, for one thing. I went through that, um, and I kind of understand the frameworks there, and I enjoy it. But I wanted to go, well, in the political blogging. I had realized, I guess I should wrap that up, but I had realized that it's my view that political activism is kind of putting the cart before the horse, and we need philosophical activism. But back on what I was saying, our view has gone together. It has converged insofar as with the realization, and it was never that far apart because you believe in you've always expressed a belief in a certain kind of empiricism. There's other words for it, but in some sort of information processing. And we would, maybe differ on well, what people generally call the ontological, what's really real, what's really out there. And I kind of had, well, my view is it doesn't matter if it's the matrix, if it's the dream, if it's the dream of a god, if, okay, whatever. But now it's converging in that with the quantum information theory and the realization that everything is running by quantum mechanics. And everything is a quantum computer because there's information in, maybe it's noise, and there's information out, maybe that's noise, right? Or maybe not. But
Hmm.
the point is, these quantum systems have information in, information out, and then they have the like the readout in a quantum computer, which is a classical moment where you get your answer.
Hmm.
So the universe is a quantum computer. Like literally, that has become the dominant. That's the next wave of quantum. That they're taking over quantum physics. Basically, is the quantum information guys.
Hmm.
Um, Susskind, and there's this guy from MIT. I always have to look up his name. But so I think that makes our view a lot.
Tegmark, is that who you're thinking about? Max Tegmark?
No,
No,
I could look him up.
no, it doesn't matter. Um,
He has some great lectures that are just MIT lectures for quantum computing classes
mhm.
for regular MIT students that are up because of open courseware.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you bring up information theory and quantum information theory, and I think there is a kind of convergence between that approach to understanding physics and the kind of ontology that I'm writing my dissertation on and that I post a lot of videos about, which comes out of um, you know, process philosophy and Alfred North Whitehead and other thinkers, where instead of talking just about information, um, the lesson that Whitehead applies to ontology from quantum physics is that what the universe is finally made up of are these little drops of experience. That a quantum event is the realization of a value, you could call it, or a purpose, and that maybe the universe doesn't have one overarching purpose or telos or goal, but there do seem to be infinitely many mini purposes, and there's many teleologies at work in nature. Sometimes nature works across purposes to itself. Other times it isn't working in harmony with itself, and you get the emergence of more order. But I think instead of just talking about information, though, which to me seems a little abstract, we should be, that's maybe one way of describing it. But when we talk about, you know, a quantum system or a state of information, what we're really talking about is not just a computation, but an experience, a feeling. There is something it is like to go through that process
Yeah,
of
but that's yeah.
being an algorithm running itself
But
out.
that's almost sort of that's a framing thing, I think, because like calling
Hmm.
it a quantum computation gives the wrong idea. It's not what computation, like computation has this deterministic sense to it, and a
Hmm.
quantum computation is specifically no. You leave things in the waveform, you focus the wave to where you want it, increasing the probability of a particular thing, like the answer to a problem,
Right.
the result of an algorithm, and it comes out. So it's a very abstract idea of computation, very, very generalized to it, to a functional, a functional, like computer algorithm functions as opposed to mathematical functions, right? Because computer algorithm functions can have illogic in them. They can have race conditions, right? So there can be anything in there, let's say, including a little quantum computer. You ask a computer, you ask a human being to move the mouse around to get a random number.
Mm-hmm.
generator or something. And so it's only a computation in the sense that there's information coming in,
Mm-hmm.
right, and information going out. And the guy I was thinking of is Seth Lloyd, but I think one of the most fascinating things, I'm curious if you've heard about this. So they're onto this idea, they're defining entropy as information that you don't have, and they're noticing things like one of the guys, and this is in the totally in the physics
Mm-hmm.
department, right? This is not even hammer off consciousness, psychology, nothing.
Right.
This is people arguing with Hawking, the people Hawking, gave into, and the kind of world he was working in, that the heat coming out of your computer is because it's throwing away information. Because your
Right.
computer is erasing itself and rewriting the bits. That's how come the bits don't decay, right? It can't just keep
Mm-hmm.
those bits. That's why it has a cycle speed, and it's refreshing that memory all the time, and it's throwing away what was there. It's making a copy and throwing away a million times a second,
Right.
and that's heat. And
Uh-huh.
if you put a thermometer into conventional entropy and put it into the hot vessel through a little hole, and you pull it out and you find out what the temperature is, you've lowered the temperatures. The entropy went in there. It became
Right.
information, and the information is this transmission back and forth.
Right.
And and they're coming up with this whole. It's going to drive. It's going to make Gary and Beardy Man's head explode, except for they'll probably die since they're 100 years behind the last wave of quantum mechanics. I think they'll probably
Right.
save from having to face when the physicists are talking about information theory and proving it with, quantum computers and quantum devices that
Right.
use
I think,
these ideas.
well, I mean, the problem is that our image of science, our popular understanding of what science is a sort of holdover from the 17th century. We still think of science in the way that Descartes and Newton thought of science, and in several hundred years of scientific
Yeah,
experimentation and theory making, we've totally blown that original understanding of what nature was and how science was going to study it. That's
yeah.
totally been destroyed. You
Yeah,
know,
as
even
of 100 years ago, totally destroyed. I mean, there's a
even
hundred years
before
probably of
100 years ago.
transition. Yeah, there's 100 years of transition where everybody was looking at the complex problems with thermodynamics,
Right,
totally leading up to this, or how do we model the atom?
right.
And even when I was a kid, though, people would tell you that it doesn't really have a shape and it's an abstract idea. Well, not
Hmm.
now, not now. Now they
Right.
are taking pictures of, oh, it's in this arrangement. The orbitals really have that shape. There really is an
Hmm.
angle between the lobes, um, but and so it's even still now transitioning. But I mean, they
Hmm.
had an argument at the beginning of the last century that was pretty conclusive. I mean, it's I love that people come up with their own physical theories, but to just dismiss the arguments that were had, I mean, to not, there's a history of science
Hmm.
where people that believed in determinism and were Nobel Prize type PhD teaching everybody physics, they went kicking and screaming when they had to get drug away from that, and they
Hmm.
did. They
Yeah.
did. Einstein had 30 years of no career because he didn't want to go.
Right. Right. I mean, what is it? Max Planck said, "Science advances funeral by funeral." As the upholders of the old paradigm just die, and their students are able to accept like the consequences of the results that they've already uncovered. I mean, even before quantum and relativity theory 100 years ago, like you said, thermodynamics already sort of disrupted this notion of pure determinism by bringing statistics into physical reality. We realized that we couldn't predict
Hmm.
with absolute certainty the position and momentum of every molecule of gas in a chamber.
Hmm.
We could only average, the collective behavior of this, and then we got the laws of thermodynamics, like entropy, as a
Yeah,
result of those averages. And like you said, in order to measure the temperature, you're interfering with the system. You're changing the system to measure it. So you
yeah,
can't measure a system independently of your own decision as to how to measure it, right? So
yeah,
even before quantum physics, in thermodynamics, you have this understanding of like the role that the measure the measurer or consciousness
yeah.
plays in sort of collapsing the probability field. So
Yeah,
there's
and no, and I think with the quantum information theory, there's actually we're getting closer to a human intuition, because all what's really going on is that the information really does exist in the real world, right? And
right,
it's energy. So
sure.
if you have a high entropy because something's hot and you get information out of it, you cool it down, you heat up the thermometer, it's become information, and so information is real. And it's like, because I never liked the idea, well, obviously a human eye, it's not the human brain. I mean, the photons of the star can hit you in the back of the head, but because of things like quantum erasure, it directly relates to meaning. If
Hmm.
something sort of leaves a mark, then that's it. But for things that like are too far away to ever see that mark, well, it's still indeterminate. You know, it's okay. So that okay, I did make a good case for that. It's getting more more friendly to intuition where I went
Right.
there. But I just mean the part that um, information and energy have this possible unification, that what was entropy, and back then, see, they this idea that they have that is repeated over and over and over, and I've seen you answering this to Nick recently,
Hmm.
that, oh, it's just because we don't have that information. That was sort of the basis. It's like, look, there's too many particles in this gas, so we're going to come up with, pressure equals volume, and temperature. We're going to come up with these ratios and make statistical characterizations because we're humans and our own mortality says we can't get all that information. But at the same time, some people were saying, well, if we never can, then it's a functional equivalent, and people already started thinking of that as some sort of a reality. But it really was later on, with quantum mechanics, where there became an ontological reality. And with the two-slit experience, it's like, no, there's a wave and it's in space. How do I know that? Because it interfered with itself over space. It's like, that is an obvious ontological argument. If a thing can interfere with itself, it's not just, in space, and depending on where the slits are, then it's not just a mathematical trick to deal with, to deal with complex math. And I think that I think that, well, see, I derail myself. My mind is definitely racing, but I derail myself with, um, so the thing that's like I was saying, I don't need to apologize, and I already have talked spirituality, but where I need to give myself permission is like in analyzing the meaning of the fact that I'm now, that we're talking about meaning, that our paths interweave. I see a meaning that you introduced me to that. I see a meaning that you knew John, and John knew Kurt, and this is where I'm talking to somebody like I always do about these spiritual matters, but I pretty much keep it to the people that want to have that conversation, and to the fact that one of the things I always have liked about Gary, that I didn't directly like it. I appreciated it about him, and there is a kind of is that he had that phantasmagorical thing. Because I came here and decided to talk about my epistemology, and why is because that's philosophical activism, and it's how people can sort out meaning. See a face in the cloud and go, well, it's not really a God up there, but I can enjoy it. Look, I'm going to paint a picture of it. I'm going to remember it. Or to see, something and go, no, that's just apophenia. Or to see something and go, I don't know. So you need an epistemology. So I was focusing on that. And I always kind of liked that Gary saw that, yeah, no, really, I have this spiritual and philosophy of art. That's what I'm really working from. And I mention it, and it was almost like, well, Gary actually listens enough. He doesn't seem like he listens, but he listens and then goes off on a tangent because, and yet he's going to be surprised that um, that I'm having this kind of conversation. Or is he surprised? Is this just some sort of gimmick of his? Is he, at this point, really trying to bully me into having thoughts that he can control? I don't think he thinks that. Or is it just the obvious that Gary isn't really in that much control of what's coming out of his mouth at a particular moment? And so he's just stream of thought in it, and I'm putting too much meaning in it. But so the last thing, though, is like, I want to put meaning on the fact that I was having this angst and having a sort of, at best, a gestalty kind of feeling of a picture, my reductionism is not active. And then I get back to my computer and I see, and it was a few minutes earlier, though actually it was like 3 minutes, and then I did a message and it got swallowed by YouTube. So it was kind of like one of those timing coincidences. And see, I wanted to talk to you because you have a meaning to me in my experiences of what I'm trying to do on YouTube, right? And that's the permission probably that I am struggling with, because I feel if I let things like that have too much meaning, it goes into putting too much weight in omens. And when I was younger, I struggled with things like this, taking too much meaning. I was open to like fate, and I was kind of trained that you could visualize things into reality, and I tested it. I wouldn't say I ever believed it, but I believed it enough to take it really seriously. And when you're open to that kind of stuff, you see these meaningful things. And I think it's really dangerous. And a lot of my natural philosophy, I think, is to deal with that, to find out, well, what's the flavor of the world really like? So yeah, I don't know if I have permission, and yet I see that meaning, and there's no two ways about it. It is meaningful to me, and if my brain is the thing relating to events that are just a coincidence, well, my psychology is still the reason. Something about my thinking wants to relate those two things, and yet, so I do relate them. And yet, this is something I don't necessarily. I probably avoid talking. I don't talk about meaning on YouTube at that level, and I'm thinking I should. I'm thinking that we've let people get away too much with. I mean, like Beardy Man. Okay, this is where I know I go on too long, so this is a perfect example. So I'll finish right with this sentence, with this thought. Beardy Man, it's comical how earnest he can be trying to tell people there's no meaning to anything. Like there's meaning to him. Obviously, that's meaning behavior. He thinks there's a meaning when he thinks he can't accomplish anything, but you know what I mean? How that he obviously thinks there's a meaning to convincing people there's no meaning. And it's not a gotcha. It's really about finding out in a postmodern world that humans are creating the meaning, or 50% of the meaning. So what? It doesn't mean there's no meaning. There's meaning. You just have to face it. If you're empirical, we see meaning. If it's an emotion like love, fine. Well, love is real too. People fight wars over it. It has big ramifications. So I think we've let them get away too much with this pretending that there isn't real meaning.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's why, in some sense, spirituality is not something that you either choose to participate in or take seriously, or choose not to take seriously. I mean, sometimes we define the word in such a way that people want to distance themselves from it, but I think when you use the word, you're talking about a feeling that all human beings have. It's sort of
Yeah.
what defines us as being human,
Yeah.
right? We could just talk about, being conscious.
Mhm.
It's already a spiritual experience if you put it in its evolutionary context, and you really start to not only, study the individual sciences as just specialized, separated, watertight domains, but you start to look at the bigger picture of what um, physical science has told us about the nature of the universe, and you just reflect on that as a conscious human being. You're having a spiritual experience. You're claiming. Think about that. The modern scientific, educated, rational person is claiming to have knowledge of the whole of things, that is true and valid. They're claiming that their consciousness is directly participating in the underlying truth and reality of the universe. I mean, if we take any of that seriously, the idea that the human being is the rational animal, we're already, admitting that we're spiritual. So, I don't think being spiritual means you believe in ghosts, or you think that your personality survives the death of your body and there's this heaven waiting for all of us in some afterlife. You know, it has nothing to do with that. There are empirical forms of spirituality, that are rooted in
Well, what
experience.
do you think about this idea? Okay, so the feeling thing is secondary almost. It's like I started off the way I start off with anything, any emotion, but really it's a way of analyzing words. In philosophy, often you read when the start of new ideas is often, what do we mean when we say? And they went through an era of, what do we mean when we say bravery and courage and honor? And then it went through, what do we mean? And so doing that with an emotion, it's like, well, take the spiritual experiences and what do they have in common? I think it's a feeling, because other than that, they're all over the freaking map. Now, right now, I'm curious about this meaning idea, because when you say be conscious, or Karen, to be serious, was talking to me about mindfulness, right? And so, which is kind of just being conscious of the moment. What are you doing right now? There's other aspects to it. Observing yourself, and it's sort of, there's a technique. It's like meditating while you do stuff, which is another thing I've always been into. It's like the mind blank meditation's great, but if you could meditate while you're actually having experiences, and all that would really mean is you're looking for the meaning. I mean, to be conscious of what's going on is to take the meaning. I mean, it's not to know everything in your brain, right? It's not to say there isn't the mechanisms and stuff. It's to
There's an
say,
unconscious, yeah.
it's to say that the information I get, there's so much of it I discard and don't take meaning from. And so being conscious of the moment is actually, and noticing the information. It's not like the information didn't go through anyway and it wasn't noticed in some sense, but it wasn't remembered, it wasn't fixed together,
Yeah.
it wasn't fit together with what you saw before and everything else going on at the moment. So to me, this is the kind of line of thought that, okay, maybe this feeling is the feeling of meaning. What we call spiritual experiences are actually a subset of meaningful experiences, in the popular social conception. But in my own case, going in nature, it really is everything that has meaning. The ant's walking along, and I see the ant. I did a lot of watching ants when I was a kid, and I noticed, they're busy, 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 supposedly. Well, no, you watch the ants, and often one ant just goes off and hangs out and cleans his things for a while and looks around, and then he goes back in his little spiral thing. And the fact that I saw meaning in what he was doing within the context of his life, the kind of lives I understand, that was spiritual. But it could just be animology. It could just be, oh, I learned that ants do take breaks, But then if you took it that way, just information, it's meaningless. A person can do accounting and have this meaningful information, and they're like, this is soul crushing. I don't have a meaning in this. I'm trying to throw every use case I can at it, and it seems to me there's a correlation between, not awe, but understanding something as meaningful can create a sense of awe, but that's part of the recipe, because to me, those are different feelings. But there is a feeling of, hey, that's meaningful. Huh. You just kind of go, oh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's just simple pattern recognition, and then there are more pronounced, sort of profound examples of pattern recognition where, like Carl Jung called them synchronicities, meaningful coincidences. Like, you were about to see if I wanted to hang out, and I was asking you at the same time through a YouTube comment. Like, that's happened to me so many times over the years on YouTube where someone else interacts with me. It's as if I was about to search for something or comment to someone, and then they do it to me. Or I find something that answers the question I was just asking. And it's like the internet and YouTube is sort of a synchronicity engine.
Yeah.
It creates this convergence of minds that heightens the chance that there will be a synchronistic event. That meaning will be found. And like you were saying, we have to be careful that we don't just sort of connect things and make meaning when there isn't really anything important going on. We can get totally lost in,
See, I'd be inclined to say that no. I mean, because in a trivial sense, there's always meaning. Those coincidences, at the very least, in a totally well, not totally classical, but in basically, a regular understanding of current psychology, the mind is primed. Like I noticed 25 years ago, I bought a 4-year-old car, and suddenly I see that car all over. Well, because you're around that car and it's primed. We know this. We do
Right.
experiments. You show somebody, a monkey, a clown, and they recognize, some other circus item quicker than they recognize a farm animal. That you can measure this and it's
Mhm.
statistically obvious. So if somebody notices a meaning, they are the connecting thing, and it just might not be what they take it to be. Like the voice in your head, it has meaning. It's just it wasn't God. When your dog was talking to you, it was really your own. Oh shit, are we there?
What's up? Yeah, I'm
Yeah, it
here.
hung. It hung. Interesting. I guess it was uploading a message, so I hung. Okay.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I would say trivial, and it's only trivially, but I would say there is meaning there at that point. It is not the meaning that the coincidence sort of obviously seems to represent, but at the very least, it's some sort of psychological fact that you're primed to see that thing. And then the funny thing with quantum computers is that's how quantum computers are work. That's how quantum computers work. Is they make one of the outcomes, they make a likely answer uh, they listen for one answer actually
Hmm.
makes it more likely as well,
Hmm.
right? So to use the car thing as an analogy, it's like, yeah, the fact that you're primed and now you know this car you went in, you didn't know what kind of make, you're buying a used car, so you show up with one kind of car, you didn't know even what brand or anything it was going to be. Now you have this form in your head, makes it easier to see other cars that fit that form. In a quantum computing uh, setting, that actually also makes it more likely that those cars will be around.
Hmm. Right. But then at some point, like, uh, when we say that someone has had a schizophrenic break, and when we start to feel fragmented because we're no longer able to distinguish between which meanings are important and which are not, then there's,
Yeah,
we have to be able to mark the difference between um, valid interpretations or interpretations that allow us to sync up with other human beings, ultimately, I guess, in a mutually sort of intersubjective way where we kind of all agree that, yeah, that's what's happening, that's what that means. When we start to have an accelerated rate of synchronicity such that we can no longer even recognize other people's interpretations, that we get so lost in our own
right.
sort of overwhelmingly meaningful experience of what every little thing means to us, that we forget that everyone else is having that same experience and that we need to kind of coordinate a little bit. Then that starts to go towards psychosis. And I think
Yeah,
spirituality and taking spiritual experience seriously is dangerous and risky, because if you go into that and you start asking questions about what meaning really is and how it emerges and how we recognize it, you start to sort of well, you open the door to transformation, so that your ego is now brought into question. You're not
hmm
going to be able to maintain uh, that sort of belief in the free, autonomous, rational existence of your rational waking ego. You're going to be forced to take other modalities of experience seriously, to sort of acknowledge the multiple identities that you are, instead of just thinking that the ego that you identify with, and you say I'm Matt, and we give ourselves these names, like that's who's really in charge here. um, there's a way that the sort of everyday
Well,
rational
I
consciousness
think
of
I'm
our civilization is psychotic right now, and people who have schizophrenic breaks are actually starting to tap into this deeper substructure of reality that our dominant civilization has made us oblivious to, uh, and forced us to ignore, so that we can, get on with the important business of making money and shuffling paper around and so on. So there's a certain truth that psychotics reveal to us, and that schizophrenia uh, reveals to us about the taken for granted values of our civilization, I think. So it's not like we should just ignore it, the psychotic experience, as invalid. We have to learn something from it. It's a symptom of what the our everyday civilization is of the sickness that we live uh, with, I think. So we have to pay attention to these to people that lose it, that have spiritual emergencies and sort of, have these breaks. We have to learn from them. They're the shamans of the modern period, I think. That
Well, I
it
really
seems
wanted
clear.
to share. This thing keeps dinging at me and telling me to upgrade, so I upgraded in another window just to
Oh,
see if it would shut up, and it's just that's going to drive me nuts. Okay, I'm gonna. I don't know what to do. Wonder if I should start it over again.
well,
Um, Anyway, the thing is, and this is a funny coincidence because okay, so that is an issue. I want to learn from them. Are you
mhm,
still there? Yeah.
mhm. I'm here,
Okay. Ding, ding, and you can't hear it, so it's like a voice in my head.
and I can
Okay,
hear
so I'll
you.
ignore it for now. Can you hear the ding?
A little bit. It's not that annoying to me, but maybe it's more annoying on your end.
I I try to close it. Yeah, no, it's pretty loud. It's as loud as you. But
Hmm.
so I'm just going to let it install, and if we rejoin or something, I don't know what'll happen afterwards. It wants to install Google
All right.
Hangouts.
Well, I've got
I think
about
that's why
10%
when.
on my battery left, so I'm gonna have to
Oh,
go
good to know.
inside and recharge, and maybe, I could come back a little bit later, but I'm gonna have to end the call
Okay,
anyways in
well
about 10 minutes.
okay, well good. Then okay, let's do that. I'd like to talk to
Hmm.
you more, but I'll just say so kind of my goal in talking to people on spiritual paths, finding somebody that's like, okay, I like how you're thinking and you're open to this stuff. And then I've been like, I want to provide the difference so you can navigate that what you call the psychotic break, so it doesn't have to be a psychotic break. And in my own case, I think I was born in the middle of other people's psychotic breaks, and I didn't start from a sanity to break from. I didn't have a sense of normalcy to break from. I've just been working on this, and it's not like things got normal, but I think there are ways to stay relatively grounded compared to um, some of the breaks I've seen. On the other hand, I went into an abusive relationships and all kinds of serious things that were definitely detours on my life. But so
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, if I'd like to talk to you more later tonight, certainly if you're still around, I'll check in an hour or so, but
well,
yeah.
in an hour, you need a whole hour.
Maybe less. I'll try to make it less. Um,
It's about 12:40 here. Okay, well,
oh,
we could also
okay.
pick it up some other time. Okay,
That's fine.
this thing will probably be done in 15 minutes, but then again, yeah, we could
Mhm.
play it by ear. I was before you sent the message. I was just going to program a little bit,
Yeah.
so I might. I don't think I'm going to go to bed right away.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
if we don't meet tonight, we'll do it another night. But yeah, just
Yeah,
I
because
want
I
to
feel
think.
we just opened up a bunch of topics, and I actually would
Yeah.
like to talk more specifically about sort of this axis of meaning and anti-meaning and the relationship of determinism and what determinism really means. And as a skeptic, I've had it thrown on me that, oh, well, is that an absolute statement? And I figured out my answer to that. And I'm also a little bit like, I don't want to pull that trick on other people, but when it comes to meaning, I, this whole compatibilism out is like, well, because you have to live as though life is this particular way. So you could go ahead and with a straight face argue that people should figure out that there is no way for them to figure anything out. It just happens.
Hmm.
That does not have to be let off the hook. Um, and somehow quantum mechanics is a bunch of hooey that's just a fad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can understand why, Nick and Gary would take a basically nihilistic perspective on existence because things are pretty fucked up right now, and they're throwing in the towel and they're saying, fuck it. The only thing I want to push back on with them is that don't try to use scientific knowledge as your premise, as if it somehow supports your determinism.
Hmm.
Um, don't try to talk about evolution as though it supports your rat race understanding. I mean, certainly, you know, science has forced the human being to sort of check some of the more self-congratulatory ideas we used to have about ourselves. But I think there's far more mystery and creativity in the universe that science has revealed to us than either Gary or Nick are willing to admit. And so long as that creativity is observable all around us, there's no reason we shouldn't believe that human beings possess it as well.
Right.
Um, so you know,
Well, that's
but
good. Well, if we talk when we talk again, maybe that'd be a good thing to remember to start up with, because it's
yeah,
sort of also this idea of spirit as what is that? A thing that shows us that we see it's living, so it has the
mhm,
animus and just the sense of it's breathing, and it can die and stop breathing, and that's
mhm,
just an indicator, obviously, but that's the word comes because it's an indicator for this particular quality of something that also can find meaning.
right,
And I'd like to go there because, see, my instinct is to go, well, yeah, especially in quantum mechanics, because the scientists today could be wrong, but the consensus is clear.
yeah,
There is ontological reality to these waves that map to probability. The die is not a 7 until, well, at least if the die is a quantum mechanical, an atom, if it's an electron in an orbital, it does not decide. It is not
yes,
decided what it is until it hits the screen. And that is the consensus. And the scientists could be wrong, but they shouldn't be able to get away with this idea that, because they agree with Newton, that somehow that's okay, because this is 100 years of just that, just that consensus. Well,
yeah.
I mean, anyway, the start of the consensus was 100 years ago, pretty
Well,
much.
last thing I just want to say is that I wouldn't necessarily, and I'm not saying you're doing this necessarily, but we'll have to get into it more. I wouldn't want to tie spirituality to one particular scientific paradigm, because if we know
Yeah,
anything about science, it's going to change tomorrow.
right.
Science is an open-ended process of inquiry, and what is true today will be considered, quantum theory will be the phlogiston of the 22nd century, So
Yes.
we have to acknowledge that open-endedness, and instead of tying spirituality to the spooky, wave-like nature of matter as we understand it now, I'd want to say that spirituality has to do not with what there is in the world, not with any particular phenomenon or system that we can distinguish and understand and study in the world, but it's not about spirituality isn't about what there is. It's the fact that there is anything.
Hmm.
So just stepping back for a moment from all the particular things that make up our experience and becoming aware of the fact that we are experiencing. That, I think, is the place where wonder and the feeling of, the spiritual feeling starts to emerge. So it's not anything in particular that we can place our finger on or anything that we can even coherently describe, but we try to get at it poetically, and I think it has to do with that sort of, it's the
Right.
unacknowledged background of everything that we're conscious of. It's what's on the fringes, just outside the horizon of our rational experience, and we can feel it, but we can't quite focus our attention on it without changing it into something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think I have an approach to answering that question, so let's save that, though. I think that, yeah,
Cool.
that this is all probably getting into, the traditional differences we've had about,
Hmm.
I like to derive these things from the most material, but it also is changing, and that's why my real presentation has been with
Hmm.
emotion and experiences and feelings and things that we have no matter what happens to science, right? That we have
Right.
because of our mind. So,
Right.
but that wasn't my answer. So okay, well, let's see. It keeps dinging at me. So if you're around in a while, maybe we talk another half hour or something.
Okay.
Um,
I'll do my
it's
best.
1 here, so who knows? Yeah, no problem either way. I'm glad I got a chance to talk to you tonight.
Yeah, good to talk to you as well. We'll talk
All
more
right,
soon. All right.
bye.
Later.